The important thing when it comes to making AI generated artworks of any kind really is the message that you have, right? So because everyone can make something of a similar level of technical quality, the differentiator is really what is the message that you have.
I'm Conor Burke.
I'm Patrick Cusack.
I'm Brie Valesky, and this is Good Question, a podcast about LLMs, AI agents, and ChatGPT prompts from your friends at Inscribe. Patrick, you are a seasoned digital product designer with over 15 years of experience. You are our lead product designer here at Inscribe, where you drive the design process from research through to delivery. You are also a UX design guest lecturer at Limerick School of Art and Design, and you even co-founded a conference for design professionals in Dublin. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for the super generous intro. Yeah, it's really great to be on the podcast. Really looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yeah, we are super excited to have you. Conor, great to have you back as well.
Yeah, I'm excited for today's topic.
Nice, me too. The question we are going to explore today is AI art. Are we all Picasso now? Patrick, outside of the design that you do here at Inscribe, which the design you do at Inscribe, I would actually argue is art, do you pursue any creative passions in your free time?
Yeah, for sure. So, in my spare time, what I really like to do is make interactive visuals. And so actually I've been trying to explore ways to incorporate generative AI into that process, and it's been really fun. So for me, it's a really nice way to learn about the tools that are out there and try and learn about how I can use them in my day-to-day work. So actually what I'm doing now is working on live stream music performance with some friends where they are going to perform the music and I'm going to do live interactive visuals to go along with it. And the visuals that we're working on have been sort of made using AI tools like, Midjourney and Runway and things like that. I'm not sure if you've ever come across the musician Max Cooper. I really admire his work. And so the stuff I'm doing is in that kind of vein. And yeah, I just love to try and practice that in my spare time.
I love that. We'll definitely link to some of Max Cooper's work in the show notes for this episode. Super interesting. Also, I want to see your live stream performance with your interactive art. I'm quite interested in this topic myself as a writer. I read and write a lot for work, but I also read a lot and write a lot in my free time because those are my favorite things to do in the whole world. Conor, you are, of course, an engineer by trade. I would also argue that engineering and all forms of problem solving are an act of creativity, but do you spend any free time on what might traditionally be considered the humanities?
Yeah, I'll admit I am quite a kind of pragmatic and analytical person, but I do quite like interior design or crafting the spaces we live in and using or considering the constraints we have, whether it's our stage of life, our budget and just space. How can we use AI tools to get inspiration, to give us new ideas and, imagine what a space could look like before committing. And of course, we've seen some really interesting ideas or proposals here online and tools already coming out. And yeah, definitely excited to see where that world goes. Something I'm definitely quite interested in.
What's your favorite room that you've designed? I did not know this about you.
Interesting. So my previous apartment, I quite liked for its simplicity in letting the view do the work and the furniture kind of blending away for the most part, using a pretty neutral color palette and using the vista outside the windows as the color palette or the art was the kind of vibe I was going for. Of course, all on a strict budget and very limited time, which again is part of the fun. You've 2 weeks, limited budget, make the most of a room. I love getting creative there and, making a space that works for you.
Oh, I love that. It's such a thoughtful way to approach the space. My aesthetic is more eclectic in general. But all to say, okay, AI art definitely has sparked a lot of conversations, new ideas, debates about creativity, originality, and what it means to be an artist in the digital age. And while we know AI can generate these very beautiful and stunning visuals or works of art that really mimic the style of, some of the great artistic masters like Pablo Picasso. But I do think there are key distinctions between AI-driven creation and human artistry. Patrick, Conor, what are your opinions on AI-generated art? Music, poetry, paintings, movies. Do you have any hot takes here? Patrick, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I'm really excited about innovations recently in like AI tools and all the kind of like, there's been this huge explosion of like tools that are now available to people. What that means is like the barrier to entry has been lowered, right? Everyone has access to tools that allow you to make amazing things. And so I think the important thing when it comes to making, AI generated artworks of any kind really is, is the message that you have, right? So because everyone can make something of a similar level of technical quality, the important kind of factor or the kind of differentiator is really the taste that someone has, right? So it's like, what is it you're making? What is the message that you have? What are you using these tools to communicate? Like that becomes the thing that then is most important. So like in the past, you might have appreciated something because of its technical excellence, but now that can be achieved very easily in some cases. So now it's like, okay, well, what are you saying? And so I think like when it comes to the use of AI tools for creativity, it's important to focus on the message, I feel like.
I love that point of view. It's so interesting to think of this time in history right now because the way we create art and art itself has always been evolving throughout human history. If we weren't willing to be adaptable to new tools and technologies for creating art, then would cave paintings and petroglyphs be considered the only true art? Even for me as a writer, I also use a number of tools to create language, whether it's my pen and my notebook, my mechanical typewriter, my laptop, and now, of course, generative AI tools like ChatGPT. Conor, what about you? Any hot takes from your end here?
Yeah, maybe it's just like maybe a widely agreed take is just how much more beautiful the world can and would likely become because of generative AI. It gives, as Patrick said, freedom and the ability to a much wider demographic of people to express themselves. And I think we're going to see lots of new ideas and creative sides of people come out. So yeah, I'm very excited about this. I almost think of it as like a new art technique, just like, Da Vinci and artists during the Renaissance, invented new painting techniques for, showing motion in oil paintings or, different techniques for drawing perspectives. And this is, once again, just another tool. And I think just like Patrick's side passion of, art visuals for music, we're going to see a lot more of that, and really excited to be a creator, but also a consumer of all this cool stuff.
I love that sentiment. The world can be a much more beautiful place because of like this greater access to this tooling. And yeah, I totally agree. That's something we've seen throughout history. Of course, as a writer, I always think about like the printing press, which made the sharing of books and pamphlets and poetry and art and information much easier and more widely accessible. Photography enabled anyone to like capture beautiful images without having to draw or paint. Even tools like Photoshop or like a synthesizer, in music. These are all just examples of how we've created and adapted to new technology in the artistic realm. But I do also understand some people's fear around it. Does it take away our humanity? The fact that these tools can also be equally as technically capable, perhaps not as creative, given that, the message is the medium now. And can an AI come up with an original message?
I know we can vibe on it for a bit, but just to maybe say, like, yeah, I think there's definitely a concern, but I think it's more of a fear that I feel will resolve itself when different creators and consumers just understand the strengths and limitations of generative AI. They'll understand their role more, but I think at the moment it's quite uncertain. But I like how you both mentioned the message is still there, and I think we're a while away from generative AI and this God model truly having human emotions or being able to relate on the same level as we can, or just the same shared experiences that's hard to encode or train. You could explain to a model what like a vineyard in Napa Valley smells like, but to maybe describe it in 10 different ways is something only a human could do, or to get to real nuance there. So yeah, personally, I think artists and creators are going to flourish from this rather than be disadvantaged, especially in the medium to long run.
That was beautiful. Patrick, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, totally agree. One other thing I would just add as well is that there is maybe this sense where AI generated imagery, it has a certain aesthetic, right? So if you use, a tool like maybe Dolly to create an image for something, and you stop there, and what you share or use is the direct output from those image models, it has, again, a kind of aesthetic that people can recognize. And maybe, as more images like that get shared, people become a little bit cynical about things that have been, just generated via AI, and no other input really was kind of like added. I think that can be a concern when it comes to like generating AI art. But what I really like is those artists that take those outputs and use them in their own work. They expand on them, right? So they use them as inputs into a kind of a further creative process. I think when people are creating AI generated art, it's important not to simply rely on a model, an image model for creativity alone. Like you can't defer your creativity to the AI model. You have to work with it, right? So like when I was researching the interactive music visuals, there's a huge, really thriving community of creators on Patreon that are trying to incorporate these types of AI image model outputs into their work. And what they all share is this kind of like a mission to try and like put their own stamp on what the image model is doing. So it looks like their work, not this visual aesthetic that people associate with maybe with Dolly or Midjourney. They put their own stamp on it. And I think that's an important part of it.
Such a great point, Patrick. It just like reinforces the fact that the artist is actually conceptualizing and shaping the final work, and the Gen AI tools can be used as the tool to like achieve that outcome. And so whether it is the artist putting in the message that's meaningful to them, putting in the stamp of their style or sort of their motif, their vibe, or even just making the piece more reflective through iteration of like their own human experiences too. Those are all these different ways that it's still, humans and our humanity that's creating the art, and just using this tool to enhance the way we're able to communicate and what we're able to create. So there's a lot of really exciting and like beautiful potential with this. But as always, I am extremely curious about what ChatGPT thinks about AI generated art, and whether it thinks we should consider Gen AI tools like itself an artist or an artistic tool. Shall we ask ChatGPT?
Let's do it.
Cool. Patrick, since it's your first time on the podcast, what should we start in our message to ChatGPT today?
Yeah, I'd love to know what ChatGPT thinks about the difference between AI generated art and human made art, let's say.
Ooh, interesting. Patrick, do you want to take the lead on reading the response?
Yeah, so the differences between AI generated art and human generated art can be nuanced and multifaceted, involving aspects of creativity, intent, process, and emotional depth. I think what it's emphasizing on the human side is that, I guess, the art reflects human experiences, which I think is really important. And then there's all these like subconscious and conscious aspects to that as well, which is interesting. And then on the AI generated side, yeah, it's kind of mentioning there that like what it's doing often is mimicking the styles that it's, I guess, been trained on. And that brings up a whole host of other kind of ethical questions as well. And I think also why it's important, as a human using AI tools for this kind of thing goes back to our point about putting your own stamp on it. If you simply use the AI generated output, what you're probably going to get is some pastiche of another style that it's been, trained on, which, is an interesting ethical question. So yeah, the process, human art, the process of creating art for humans is deliberate or spontaneous. Yeah, that's interesting. And then whereas AI art, it's to do with training models and vast data sets of existing artworks. It says it doesn't refine artwork the way that a human does. Like that's interesting too. I think like often you see this also with text-based responses. You get the first pass. And I know more ChatGPT models are focused on like deep learning and iterative thinking. But quite often the response is generated on the fly in one go and isn't iterated on. Whereas I guess a human artist, you might also often see human artists that do like a series of something, or they're like an exploration of a theme, and there's constant, iteration there. Whereas like, yeah, I guess what it's saying here is maybe there's like this for AI art, it's like you get the output and that's kind of it. And unless you prompt it to explore it further, it's not necessarily going to do that. So yeah, I like the idea that a human can explore a theme and there's like, a whole series or a whole kind of era even of an artist's life that might be dedicated to a particular kind of theme.
I love that. Yes. And our titular artist, Picasso, and his blue period. So I think that's such an interesting thing to highlight that I hadn't thought about before is would an AI have their own blue period? Really interesting. Go ahead, Patrick.
No, I was just going to say I was just using the word era. It's quite a topical one.
Yes. Conor, what's sticking out to you about some of these responses?
Just how aware ChatGPT is of its limitations. It's always interesting, Well, the next step then is like maybe can the AI counteract this by maybe tapping into its emotions. But as I mentioned earlier, I think we're a while away from AI agents or Gen AI tools understanding the nuances of culture and emotions and time periods and so on. So I think it's really well articulated the difference between human and AI art. It makes you almost appreciate human art more by understanding when and how something was created. Whereas before we probably took that creative process for granted. So yeah, this was a really good answer from ChatGPT.
Yeah, the one other thing that stuck out to me, I love how it's calling out the emotional connection and expression, which is a lot of what we've talked about. But if you can scroll down, Conor, the audience perception call out I thought was really interesting here, where ChatGPT is saying that audiences appreciate human art for the story of the artist, the process, or like the historical or cultural context, whereas, AI art may be appreciated for its technical prowess. But to your point that you're just saying, well, that you both were just saying, like, an AI doesn't understand like the cultural context or the time period or maybe the whole historical cultural context of like a moment we as society might be experiencing. So does it have the ability to create art that like reflects that? Because that's such an important place that art has in our society and our culture, is just kind of capturing a moment or sharing what it was like to go through a certain experience culturally or individually. So a lot of really interesting points brought up here. Conor, what question do you want to ask next?
Let's get its opinion on, does it think AI art is art?
Ooh, okay.
More nuanced question.
I love trying to see if it'll give us an opinion, because it usually says, as an AI, I don't have feelings or opinions. Oh, okay. This is interesting. It says, yes, AI generated art can be considered art, but it challenges traditional notions of what is art and what it means to create. And it has, a list of examples of why AI can be considered art: the expression and aesthetic. It's calling out the creative process, innovation in art forms.
Yeah, there's an interesting point there actually around photography. I think about this sometimes, right? So like, personally, I don't particularly like when painters paint hyper realistic paintings, right? Because, essentially that's, trying to do what a photograph can do, right? So what I'm really interested in when it comes to like sort of fine art is like paintings that have a more expressive sort of aesthetic, right? And even especially with illustration, right? So like what I really like about illustration is that like, you have a strong sense of the illustrator's personal style, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. So, if you can achieve something photoreal through a photograph, I personally would sort of question why you would go to the effort to reproduce something that's hyper realistic, where when you look at it, the only value people might see in it is that it took a lot of effort, but like maybe there's not a strong message, right? So like, and I think what's interesting then is about AI generated art is that you could also pose the question about like, again, if AI generated sort of imagery can be like technically excellent in terms of like the execution, what's the value of it? Or the value then again comes back to, what it's saying. So like, and this kind of question around how the author or the kind of person using tools to create AI generated art puts their own stamp on it. So I like my paintings to sort of have like a personal aesthetic from the artist. Illustrations the same. And also if you're going to produce AI generated imagery, like it's really, really important that you don't, again, defer the stylistic side of it, or the kind of like, the style to the AI, that you put your own stamp on it too.
That's such an interesting point. I also like my paintings to have a little bit more of like expression and feeling in them. And I could see why someone might want to paint a photorealistic painting if they enjoyed the process of painting it and the technical challenge, but I'm not sure if there would be like a market or an audience for that painting because, to your point, Patrick, it can be easily reproduced. There is a high supply of or a large supply of something like that piece of art or that type of artwork or that way of seeing the world through art. So, Conor, what stands out to you?
As a fan of hyperrealism, I have some thoughts.
Go for it.
No, I'm joking. Although I am a fan of maybe hyperrealism of the mundane. Obviously there's Campbell soup can, Andy Warhol example there maybe, or I'm not sure that's hyperrealism actually, but there's definitely a time and place. But I was just I have a painting over my shoulder here of like a watercolor of a scene in India that actually I think is a great example of maybe what like an expressionism version of a scene versus the realism of a scene kind of encapsulate. You can focus on different aspects and different characters within the scene. So yeah, definitely hear your point, Patrick. To like art or painting is a lens through that the artist is looking at the world, and you want to see that world through their lens, not necessarily through a lens that you could also see as well. There's a missing message there.
Cool. So what's also interesting about this response from ChatGPT on whether AI art can be considered art is it does highlight some of the challenges, like what's the intent of the art, authorship, originality, can it have emotional resonance? So even if it is a new way for us to think about art, it's a multifaceted topic that there's a lot of different areas that we could go down in terms of exploring. And we're just here to ask good questions. We don't always have all the answers yet. All right. For this next prompt, I want to upload a picture to ChatGPT and see if it can describe the picture.
Okay, let's do it. I've got a picture downloaded here.
Perfect.
So it's unfortunately of myself and my co-founder, but
in Conor's defense, I selected the picture. So then let's ask it if it can describe the picture.
Yes.
And maybe just to add while you're getting that ready, I really like this approach to trying to put like a personal stamp on AI generated output. So like if you use a personal photograph as an input and then go through this process of describing it and generating stuff based on it, I think that can be a nice way to put a personal stamp on this kind of stuff.
I love that because I actually do that sometimes with my LinkedIn posts. I will input text from other LinkedIn posts and I'll say, can you write a post about this concept, mention this thing, and do it in my style? So I think it's really interesting. All right, Conor, since it's a picture of you, why don't you describe?
This is uncomfortable.
I'm so sorry.
So the image shows two men sitting side by side on white chairs. That's true. And a textured grey wall. Both are casually dressed. Then it goes on to describe there's a man on the left and a man on the right. So man on the left wearing navy blue sweater, blue jeans, white sneakers, smiling and hands clasped in front of him. Hair is short and neatly styled. Then man on the right, light grey blazer, black shirt, pants, brown shoes. Also sitting with his hands clasped in front of him and has a slight smile. His hair is similarly styled as his man on the left. The setting appears to be casually yet professional with a modern and minimalistic feel. That was the intent. And the men look relaxed and approachable, suggesting a friendly and professional environment. Also the intent. I feel seen.
Agreed, because I was directing this photo shoot, so that was the intent of the photo. Interesting that it didn't say the two men look eerily similar. Since you two are twins, but maybe it feels very distinct in the photo itself. Okay.
It must be an AI generated photograph then.
That's what it's thinking. Any other thoughts about the description?
No, again, just very impressive disability. I remember seeing, research coming out a couple of years ago about these computer vision algorithms trying to simply describe what it saw in an image. Like a cat on the road was very complicated and very difficult to do. But it seems to do this with ease and like extraordinary detail here. So, just amazing to see the progress here in a couple of years.
Nice. All right. Now let's ask it to generate an image based on that description. Oh, it's loading. I know. I'm very curious.
That is eerie.
It is creepy.
Yeah, and actually the composition is very similar. The position of the floor in the photograph falls around the same spot, and then the chairs are very similar. The kind of dappled effect in the background, like it's kind of captured that as well. Yeah, it's really interesting. It missed one important detail, obviously.
It is so interesting because, I mean, the hands are a little weird. I feel like AI generated hands are always a little weird, but it does feel in essence like I look at that and I'm like, oh yeah, that's how they're sitting. But then I look back and it's not actually exactly how you're sitting, but it does feel like weirdly accurate in terms of the positioning. It's creepy.
Yeah. I wonder how useful this could be for, let's say, movie producers to, instead of like sketching out a scene, they could just like prompt or describe a scene, and then, they can visually describe to an actor what they're hoping to achieve. You can imagine how this could be useful for, again, yeah, more on the creative side, expressing yourself visually by using words.
So interesting, like all these different ways to creatively express yourself are more easily translatable than ever. I'm not good at drawing, but now the fact that I can use language, which is the medium I'm most familiar with, to create a drawing is just like, I don't know. So it's fascinating. It's very fascinating.
So quick and easy to do as well. I know someone that, for example, in Apple's recent announcements about like upcoming AI features in, say, iOS 18, one of the ones they're going to release is a AI generated emoji. So you can make these like custom emoji, based on a prompt and things like that, which is interesting. But I know someone as well that will use the fact that you can generate images like this super quickly and easily to use it in like messages to people, right? So if you're waiting for someone in a cafe, instead of saying, "Hey, I'm waiting for you, I'm in the cafe now," they'll just generate an image of what they're doing, like, and send that instead. And so like you can kind of just do these like real time or like close to real time generated sort of images that are very quick and easy to produce that you can like use in all kinds of creative ways.
Possibilities are endless. It feels like. Okay, well let's say goodbye to ChatGPT for now. I don't think we can top this AI generated image of Conor and Ronan. And we'll switch gears to just talking a little bit more about what's happening in the Gen AI space lately. A lot has been going on over the past 6 months. Midjourney, just a couple weeks ago, announced that they're giving up to 25 free AI generated images to everyone. I haven't tested that out yet, but I definitely want to. Runway, we've mentioned them here, an AI video generation tool, released their Gen 3 Alpha Turbo, the latest version of the AI video generation model that claims it is 7 times faster, half the cost of its predecessors. But Runway has also been accused of training that model on YouTube videos and copyrighted content without permission. So given all that's happening in the space, I just want to hear more on the ground level. Patrick, what generative AI tools do you use and how are you using them right now?
Yeah, for sure. It's such an exciting time for generative AI tools. And there's so many out there. To name some of the obvious ones, DALL-E for images, Midjourney, you touched on, Runway, are great. And there's also like competitors to those tools coming out. There's another really good image to video model from Luma Labs that I've seen used online quite a lot. There are kind of more niche iOS apps that I'm not sure if they've brought. There's one called Polycam that I really like, which is not strictly a AI tool, but can be used in combination with other AI tools to kind of create some really interesting results. So Polycam will do scans of an environment, and you can kind of like take that into other tools and work with it using AI as well. So that's quite exciting. There are some of the ones that I'm using in my own personal work now for the interactive visuals. Again, there's a really interesting space around sort of these tools. One of the key ones for interactive visuals is Resolume. And so that's kind of a VJ software. And what you can do is take things from Midjourney or Runway and use them as assets in, a VJ tool like Resolume. So they all kind of work together in really interesting ways. And there's other interactive tools like Touch Designer, and there's another one I used recently called Orchestra, which are all very similar, but like essentially, if you start with an AI tool like maybe Midjourney or Runway and take interesting outputs from those, you can bring them into all these other really creative tools and do really interesting stuff with them. And so that's kind of the foundation of the personal work I'm doing now, is this kind of workflow from Midjourney and Runway into these kind of interactive tools as well. So I'm really excited about AI tools at the moment.
Nice. Okay, wait, what is a VJ tool?
Sorry, yeah, it's a VJ. Okay, cool. So like VJ, I guess, is like a visual DJ, right? So
Stop it.
Yeah. So VJ tools would be things like Resolume is the one I mentioned, and what you can do with that tool is kind of like, I guess if you imagine a DJ has a collection of records at their disposal and they can pick and choose which ones to kind of play. Resolume does the same thing with visual assets, right? So you can load it up with tons of visual assets like movies and kind of images you might have created in AI tools like Midjourney and Runway, as I said. And then when you're performing live, you can sort of decide which to use and how to put them together. So you can make these real-time decisions about how they work together. But you're starting with this like toolkit of AI generated content that you then kind of like perform live, if that makes sense. So it's super exciting. You can do very powerful things with it.
That's super interesting. It's like playing jazz freestyle, but with visuals. I love that.
One or two other quick ones just to touch on briefly. I've seen a lot of people using real-time stable diffusion models. So they might take a tool like Touch Designer and hook it up to a stable diffusion model that generates real-time AI generated images in response to something in an environment. So you could have it connected to a camera feed or some other input, and you're creating these live real-time AI visuals. And that's super exciting. It can be done really well.
Okay, and what is a stable diffusion model?
Yeah, okay, cool. So stable diffusion. So if you think about Midjourney, for example, Midjourney is going to generate a really amazing quality image based on your prompt, but it'll take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to come back, or even longer sometimes, depending on how you interact with it. You can get it to do a high-res version of your image, and that whole process can take like 5 or 10 minutes until you get the finished result. But the finished result that you get is super high quality. It's high definition. It's a very well kind of like crafted asset at the end. A real-time stable diffusion model, what it does is it sacrifices that quality for speed, right? So it's generating tons and tons of images all in one go. So like it's imagine like a video that's not pre-rendered. It's being created dynamically in real time, but the quality is not super high. Like it's quite low definition in terms of like the amount of pixels it's working with. But it's doing it, as I said, it's sacrificing that density for speed. And what that means then is those images can react to things in real time, right? So for example, what you could do is take a camera input from one of us, right, on the podcast, and hook it up to a prompt, so some sort of ChatGPT style prompt that says, that defines the style that you want to work with. And then what stable diffusion model will do is combine the input from the camera and the prompt that we set out and generate a new image, which is like based on the input from the camera and in the style that comes from the prompt, and generate this new thing. And as I said, do that in real time. So like, as I said, there's this community of artists on Patreon doing some really exciting things with this kind of stuff. It's really interesting to look into.
Your example was a better example because I was immediately thinking of like Ocean's 11 and like feeding in a fake AI generated real-time security feed while you're trying to rob a casino. And to be clear, I am not endorsing robbery or robbing casinos in any way, shape, or form, but that's the visual that came to my head. That is crazy fascinating.
And just finally, a tool I use quite a lot day to day, ChatGPT, we've been looking at it briefly there. I actually find it's really good for product design. So when it comes to writing UX copy, it's always it's quite good at giving you an initial draft that you can kind of hone and iterate on yourself. And actually, sometimes, you can take a screenshot of a design and ask it directly for feedback, and it gives pretty decent feedback, actually. So like if I find myself working on my own and I need to bounce something off of someone and there's no one else available, I might do that with ChatGPT and just get some initial feedback. And it can be a really helpful way to kind of craft and iterate on product design work as well. So lots of exciting stuff. I know I covered a lot there, but I'm super excited about this kind of stuff.
So fascinating. Conor, what generative AI tools are you using in your personal life or professional life?
Yeah, it's really dominated by ChatGPT. I find myself defaulting back to text capabilities or image capabilities for whatever I'm trying to figure out or work on. So work-wise, one that I love doing every now and again is just data wrangling, or in my personal life, designing a wedding invitation using watercolor design aesthetic based on like real imagery. So I found ChatGPT just to be like incredibly versatile, and haven't maybe ventured beyond enough into these other tools in my day-to-day life just yet. But based on Patrick's suggestions here, I think I'm getting a bit inspired.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm also learning a lot and getting inspired on this episode. And similar to you, Conor, I use ChatGPT myself probably the most, but also the nature of my job involves a lot more of just like natural language, English language. So a lot of wordsmithing. I use an SEO Gen AI tool called Surfer SEO. It's incredible. And I even use a lot of, I don't know if you'd call it Gen AI. Well, would you call it something like Gong's AI, Gen AI, if it's writing responses to my questions.
Yeah, I think under the definition of a LLM.
Yeah. So I'm asking it questions all the time, and it's generating meeting summaries, like referencing any ROI metrics that folks mentioned. So there's just so many interesting applications for it. But we did touch on a little bit about how these models are trained. Conor, Patrick, what are your thoughts there, especially when it comes to copyrighted material?
Yeah, this is a difficult topic. I appreciate both sides are trying to figure out what's best for them and, trying to do what's fair. And I think overall, we're in this time of this equilibrium between creators and the AI model developers, where we just haven't found the right mechanism for rewarding and recognizing the creators behind the scenes. And I think on both sides, we need more collaboration. So the AI model companies need to, or it feels like they need to put more effort into thinking about this problem. And then on the creator side, I think there needs to be, I guess, maybe empathy for the problem on hand too as well. I think in the short term, while there will be challenges, in the medium to long run, I think it's beneficial for both. It's going to be beneficial for the creators as well as the AI model developers, and like in the long run, it'll give people more access to art and these creative medias, and will be like a net positive for everybody. But in the meantime, there will be some road bumps to get over.
Patrick, I would really love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Conor was saying there. I think it's really important to try and find a balance, as you said, between the creators that are kind of putting their work out there, and then obviously AI companies that are training on that data. I think there can sometimes be a slight power imbalance between maybe the people, companies training on publicly accessible sort of imagery and things like that, versus the people that choose to put their work out there. I think it can be challenging when you choose to put your work online. You're in a slightly difficult position where it's hard for you to opt out of the training aspect. And there's been some interesting research recently into how some initiatives might attempt to restore the balance of power slightly in favor of creators. And there's been some interesting research from MIT around ways to try and treat pixels of your images so that it's more difficult to be trained on. I think that's an interesting exploration, but I think ultimately what Conor was saying about this like positive and collaborative relationship between people putting their work out there and those that are kind of companies that are then training on it, I think finding a way to work together positively and collaboratively is really important. There are tools like this where you can make it more difficult to have your work trained on, but that's maybe a big step to take. And I think if other solutions can be found in the short term that are more positive and collaborative, I think that's great.
Plus one to everything you guys have just said, I think the goal is this very collaborative, workable relationship between the model creators and the artistic creators, so that there's a nice balance between who gets to opt in and out of having their artwork trained on. Well, we have been talking about some ways to adapt your approach to your art with a lot of these Gen AI tools. Patrick, are there any examples that come to mind for you of artists that you think are doing this really well?
Yeah, for sure. There's an Irish artist that I'm a big fan of, and her recent work to me is a great illustration of what we've been discussing. I'd love to share my screen and show you. So her name is Aoife O'Dwyer. She started out working as a product designer. She moved into illustration. She developed this sort of popular collection of NFT characters called the Foofies, and but since then has kind of like developed her work, right? And I think here's an example of. Oh, actually, before we look at this, I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of her style. So it's this really colorful, kind of vibrant aesthetic, and I'm a big fan. And as I said, we've discussed earlier about like illustration being a way for like to express your opinion, or it's a very opinionated kind of form of art, I guess, which is interesting. So if you look at her illustration style here, the more recent posts I find really interesting. So this one is she's calling it a liminal space, okay, and so it is kind of it's this space that she's created, which I think definitely fits in with her kind of aesthetic, but it's executed in a really interesting way. So she's kind of followed a workflow here. It's very similar to what we described earlier. So she has taken her own visual style into Midjourney and created lots of like static images of these spaces in Midjourney. And so again, there's this kind of dialogue between her personal visual aesthetic and kind of really kind of like well executed delivery that is possible through something like Midjourney. And she takes this extra step after this then, which is she brings these like sort of individual frames created in Midjourney into another tool called Luma Labs. And what it's able to do basically is almost animate the differences between several images. So you have these like starting frames, maybe frames somewhere in the middle, and then these ending frames. And Luma Labs is filling in the gaps. And so you can see that's kind of what's happening here. We're going through this space, and Midjourney has defined specific images, and Luma Labs is filling in the gaps from one image to another to create this kind of like tour through this liminal space, which I find really interesting. So like, again, for me, I think Aoife is using AI tools here to do the kind of work that wasn't possible before, or if it was, it would take learning 3D software. The process of making it would take much, much longer. And what's possible now is that there's this really fast iteration that's possible through kind of this new AI workflow. And it can lead to really interesting results. And I just think like, here's what can happen when you put these really powerful tools into the hands of a really talented illustrator like Aoife. And I'm really excited to see that kind of stuff.
I love this example. Her visual style totally comes through in here. It's that like bright, almost neon popping aesthetic. And so it's so interesting to see it in practice. It's cool that we're only at the start of this. So it's almost impossible to imagine all the different art and different types of art and different modalities of art and different ways that we might be able to engage with art in the future. But we have to wrap up the episode for today. So it is time for our lightning round. And the lightning round question is, what is your favorite work of art? Patrick, I'll go to you first.
For sure. So yeah, my favorite work of art is a photography series by David Hockney called Joiners. I'm a big fan of this. I came across it when I was in college and I had to recreate it as part of a project. So I had a kind of I developed an appreciation for it from kind of working on it briefly. But David Hockney's Joiners project really is like an interesting take on photography. And it's kind of ties into some of the things we've been saying already. It's photography on the surface, but actually he's putting his own personal stamp on it in a really big way. And maybe I might show you briefly what that looks like. David Hockney's Joiners looks a little bit like this, so it's portrait photography, but with a really personal perspective, right? So like, let's say if you take this image here, here's a self-portrait, right? Using this joiner technique. And basically what he's doing is he's taking lots of different close-up photos and assembling it together to create like, it's not an accurate depiction of him as a person, but it's a very personal one. And I think he takes this approach then with, when he uses this method to kind of do portraits of people, you get a really personal perspective of that person. That's not simply a photo. It's a photo with, a very personal lens, through a personal lens, I guess. Yeah, and I just really like him taking the kind of, medium of photography and doing something really interesting and creative with it.
That is so fascinating, because not only with the style are you seeing the artist like through their own lens, so to speak, of how they see themselves, but also for me, it keeps evoking the Walt Whitman quote, like, I am multitudes, and that's like really what I see when we look at this kind of style. It's so fascinating. Cool. All right, Conor, what about you? What's your favorite work of art?
Yeah, this is really tough. I'm not sure there's like a singular piece, but one that I came across lately was this architect in California, Mickey Munich. He's known for building these very organic structures along the coast of California that have this kind of like treehouse, eccentric indoor-outdoor vibe. I haven't had a chance to see it in real life yet, but the kind of architecture is like quite an antidote to what we tend to see nowadays. So yeah, definitely a big fan of his, and yeah, hope we get to see it in real life soon.
Nice. I love the sort of like embracing of nature approach to architecture. And I just looked at a couple quick images of his work online, and it reminded me of like Hobbit homes from Lord of the Rings that are really built into the natural landscape. So very, very cool. I also find it incredibly difficult to choose a favorite. We don't have to say these are ultimate favorites, but one that always comes to mind for me is this painting called Buffalo Trail, The Impending Storm. It's by Albert Bierstadt. This is like an oil on canvas painting featuring bison in sort of this rich landscape of an impending storm. And yes, this is sort of technically accurate to what's happening, but it also feels like it's telling a story, which for me adds a layer of emotionality. And this image is from the National Gallery of Art, which is also where I actually saw this painting. So this one always just strikes me as like, it's a static image, but it feels like so much is going on. And also, I just love bison. I fell in love with this painting after I went to Yellowstone National Park. Such a sentimental one for me. Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today. We hope you laughed a little and learned a lot, and we will see you next time. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Quick side note, media is actually plural and medium is the singular of media. And that's a fun little grammar fact that I always like to share with people. You said medias. I thought it was great. It's just I wouldn't know that if I wasn't such a grammar nerd, and I don't expect other people to know that. All right.
You cut out the S.
Yeah. It's just media. That's the plural. Data is actually supposed to be plural, and datum is supposed to be the singular of data. Anyway, it doesn't matter. All right, I'm going to bring it back. Okay, sit back up, Conor. Okay, great.
I'm looking at Resolume here, Patrick. It's incredible. Wow.
That's so good. That makes sense.
Conor, pay attention. Don't get pay attention.
When you see these visuals, there's
I'll
nothing else going on
Okay.
in the world.